Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating Supreme Court case. It's got everything: a public officer, doctor documents, and a whole lot of government money that just vanished.
All right, so here's how we're going to unpack this. We'll start with the hard facts, what actually happened. Then we'll look at the big legal questions this case raised. After that, we'll see what the court decided, why they decided it, and the major legal principles that were reinforced. And finally, we'll cover the penalties. So let's start with a number, this one: 614,151 pesos and 93 centavos. That's the staggering amount a Bureau of Internal Revenue agent was accused of siphoning from public funds over just a couple of years. So the big question is, how did he allegedly do it? Let's get right into the facts of the case against Manolito Gil Z. Zafra. He was a revenue collection agent for the BIR up in La Union.
Okay, so check this out. This is a perfect example of how this scheme worked. On the left, you have what taxpayers actually paid. You can see it on their official receipts. But on the right, that's what the agent Zafra reported to the government using his own copies. In this one instance, taxpayers paid in almost 115,000 pesos, but the official report only showed 227 pesos. The rest? It was just gone.
So how did this all come to light? Well, it was some pretty classic audit work. The BIR put together a special team. They started comparing Zafra's reports against other internal documents. And this is the key part: they got copies of receipts from a major taxpayer. And that's when the alarm bells went off. They found huge gaps in the numbers across 18 different receipts. So they sent Zafra a letter saying, hey, you need to return this money. And he just ignored it. And that, of course, brings us to the courtroom. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Zafra didn't really deny that the money was missing. His whole defense was basically, it wasn't me.
This was the absolute core of his argument. He essentially tried to throw his own staff under the bus, claiming that his subordinates were the ones handling the money and faking the documents. He was just the guy in charge. He wasn't the one doing the dirty work. So the court had to answer. Does that excuse him?
Well, that defense was put to the test. It went from the regional trial court up to the Court of Appeals and finally all the way to the Supreme Court. And at every single level, the answer from the justice system was exactly the same: a very clear and very firm yes, he is liable. And here's the final word from the Supreme Court: petition denied. The conviction for all 18 counts stands. They found absolutely no reason to overturn the earlier decisions. For Zafra, this was the end of the legal road. The court didn't mince words. They said the prosecution proved beyond a doubt that Zafra himself was the forger. And, crucially, they established that faking those documents wasn't just some side issue, it was an essential step for him to actually commit the main crime of stealing the money.
So why were the courts so sure? What was the specific evidence that made the case so airtight? Let's break down the court's reasoning, what lawyers call the ratio decidendi.
The court basically built this inescapable chain of responsibility. First, those fake reports, they had a signature on them. Second, the receipt books with the altered numbers. They were officially issued to him. He was accountable for them. Third, and this is a huge legal point, the law presumes that if you are the accountable officer holding falsified documents, you are the one who falsified them. And then, the final nail in the coffin for his defense, the court said even if, for the sake of argument, his subordinates did do it, he was still liable because his failure to supervise them was in itself gross negligence.
You know, this case is so important because it's not just about one guy. It reinforces a really critical legal doctrine that applies to every single person holding public office.
So the court applied this concept called a complex crime. Think of it this way: when you have to commit one crime, like falsification, as a necessary step to commit another bigger crime, like embezzlement, the law doesn't treat them as two separate things. It rolls them into one complex crime. And when that happens, the penalty you get is for the more serious offense, and it's applied in its most severe form.
So what did all of this mean for Zafra in the end? Let's look at the actual sentences that were handed down.
The penalties were serious, and they scaled up depending on how much was stolen in each count. For 11 of the 18 counts, where the amount was over 22,000 pesos, the sentence was reclusion perpetua. That's essentially a life sentence. And on top of that, he got perpetual special disqualification, meaning he can never, ever hold a public office again.
And the punishment didn't end with prison time. Remember that number from the beginning? The court ordered Zafra to pay back the full amount he stole, every last centavo, plus a 6% annual interest until it's all paid off.
At the end of the day, this case is a powerful and pretty stark reminder of what public accountability is all about. It's not just about what you do personally, it's also about your responsibility for the people you supervise. It really leaves us with this critical question about public trust. Where does the buck truly stop?